Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if I'm going to be honest with you, I don't want to make this video. Okay, we are going to be talking down on some rookie wide receivers I was actually excited about before the NFL Combine. But the more and more research that I do, the more and more I'm realizing that, hell, these guys are most likely going to end up being fantasy football bust. I want to talk about what's exciting about them, what is very concerning, and why you should probably be passing on them in 2023 rookie drafts. But of course, before we get into it, go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe if you play Dynasty, and if you want to get into a free fantasy football group chat with me and a ton of other smart people, you can find the link in the comment section, find it in the description. I think we have almost 10,000 people in that free fantasy football group chat, so make sure you are in there. But that should be about it. Let's go through and let's dive into these rookie wide receivers. And the first guy that I want to be looking at is Jordan Addison. And before we talk about any of the negatives, instead, let's look at the positives. Because Jordan Addison has been a very exciting wide receiver for quite some time. I don't even know how much money he got paid to go to USC that final season, because if we're looking at his sophomore year at Pitt, the man was a monster. If you remember, after 2021, going into 2022's offseason, everybody was talking about how Jordan Addison and Jackson Smith-Njigba were going to be the two next great things at the wide receiver position going into the NFL. We just had to wait a year. And it makes sense why people thought that with Jordan Addison. As a sophomore, the man went out there and had almost 1,600 receiving yards in 14 games played. As a sophomore, even as a freshman, he broke out right away with only 10 games played, 666 receiving yards, 60 receptions as well. So you're seeing Jordan Addison be a very effective true freshman, then dominant as a sophomore, and you're all over him. But then he goes to his junior season, and hell, it's not that pretty. Playing at USC with the #1 quarterback in the 2024 draft, you would assume that Jordan Addison would have had a phenomenal season, but no, he scales back in only 11 games played. He only has 875 receiving yards, which is a significant hit compared to what you saw as a sophomore. And really, those counting stats don't matter too much. We understand that what we need to be doing is looking under the hood, looking at how good the offense was, and seeing the percentage of the offense that Jordan Addison actually accounted for. Well, if we go into those in-depth numbers, Addison was never too dominant from a market share perspective. I mean, actually, he only accounted for 23% of the receiving yards on a per game basis at that USC offense. That is less than what you had with Jackson Smith-Njigba's sophomore season, Quentin Johnston's any season, Josh Downs' sophomore year, Zay Flowers' sophomore year, Jalen Hyatt junior season, Kayshon Boutt's sophomore year. I mean, even guys like Rashee Rice, blah, blah, blah. We can go down to the bottom end of this class. It was a bad season, to say the least, even if he was a part of an elite level offense. And if we go back to what we had as a sophomore, well, yeah, the man had 113 receiving yards per game. It wasn't a ridiculous market share number. It was 33%, which is almost identical to what you had with JSN, Quentin Johnston, Josh Downs, where it's not like he was a tier out of all those guys there either. But I do want to be fair. He won the Biletnikoff. He may end up being a first-round NFL draft pick, and his sophomore and freshman seasons were phenomenal, and that is why I was extremely excited. But before we get to the reason why I'm probably no longer drafting him, let's next talk about someone else that I was very excited about after their sophomore season. Let's go over to UNC and let's look at Josh Downs, where Josh Downs didn't have as many receiving yards on a per game basis. I mean, the man only accounted for 102 receiving yards per game, which as a true sophomore, obviously that's great. I'm not trying to talk down on him. I'm just saying compared to Jordan Addison's sophomore season, maybe it's a little underwhelming, but still at the end of the day, I mean, if we're going to be looking at this was a North Carolina offense that didn't have a ton of production to go around. I mean, you are looking at Josh Downs with 101 receptions, and after that, 31 for Antonio Green, 24, 18, 15, 12, 11. So it's literally Josh Downs and then a bunch of nothing beyond that. I mean, teams going into a UNC matchup knew the only thing we had to do is stop Josh Downs, who obviously has Sam Howell at quarterback, and they still couldn't do it. Josh Downs was phenomenal, but as a junior, he does get a little bit worse with Sam Howell going to the NFL. I mean, Josh Downs does scale back to about 93 receiving yards per game, and instead of accounting for 40% of his market share numbers, that goes down to 30%. But to be honest with you, their junior seasons aren't the primary reason why I am now scared of these wide receivers. Now, we knew that they were going to be smaller, but I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to say, well, you know what? They can still come in and they can still weigh 181, 182. I mean, in the case of Addison, I really thought it was going to happen. Josh Downs was kind of a long shot to get to that 184 range. But anyway, they come in and they end up weighing 171, 173. And I see a lot of people on Twitter freaking out about this, and I'm going, okay, well, I don't really care. Weight doesn't matter too much at wide receiver. It doesn't correlate with fantasy production. I'm just going to listen to what we had with the production of these players in college till you dive into it a little bit more. And while, yes, it is 100% true that for 95, 96-ish% of players, weight doesn't really matter at wide receiver as it does at running back. Of course, running back, it matters because we need to know if you're going to be a running back that's seeing possibly 20 plus touches a game if you have that kind of frame, or if you maybe cap out at around 10 touches per game. We all know running back, it matters. Wide receiver, I didn't think it did, and it doesn't as long as you hit some minimum thresholds. What I wanted to do is I wanted to go back to 2014. The reason I choose 2014 is that's almost 10 years ago. That's when I started playing Dynasty Fantasy Football. So that's when I can draw back on any season and you could just randomly approach me on the street and go, hey, Mason, what were Dynasty rookie drafts like in 2016? And then I can go through and I can tell you, well, a lot of people thought it was going to be Laquan Treadwell or Ezekiel Elliott. Obviously, those people were stupid. You also had Dodson, Corey Coleman, Sterling Shepard was 2015. Regardless, you know what I mean? That's when I actually have that vast knowledge of Dynasty Fantasy Football. Since 2014, we've looked at every top 24 wide receiver finish on a points per game basis. This is a sample size of 216 finishes. So this is a very large sample, ladies and gentlemen. And out of these 216 finishes, there were a total of 3 wide receivers that weighed less than 180 pounds. There were Deshaun Jackson, John Brown, and Devonta Smith. And now initially, I know what you're going to say. I wanted to say the same thing. Well, Mason, are we really doing this with Jordan Addison? Are we really talking about his weight? People made the mistake of doing the same thing with Devonta Smith in 2021. Yeah, we got to bring it up because they're completely different wide receivers, pretty much top to bottom. Let's first start with the obvious ends. You have Deshaun Jackson, John Brown as field stretching options. Almost exclusive deep threats. I don't want to disrespect Deshaun Jackson. His Chip Kelly year was my first year winning a fantasy football championship. But anyway, going back to this, they are primarily exclusive deep threats. They won with their speed, and they did not need to command a lot of volume to be effective in fantasy. And this isn't something you find very often. 9 times out of 10, if you're trying to find the next Deshaun Jackson and you find yourself drafting John Ross, you find yourself drafting Henry Ruggs, it's not going to work out for you because that player is such an outlier and it's so hard to find that it's like chasing a unicorn, okay? You're never going to see that unicorn. You're never going to see that mermaid ever again, especially if you're going through and looking for it. John Brown, I'd say almost the same thing. And with Deshaun Jackson, John Brown, what's very funny is these were 2 field stretchers that ran a 4.34, 4.35 40-yard dash, and they weighed a little bit more than these guys. They weighed 175 and 179. But let's not even look at those 2 guys because I think it's easy to see how Deshaun Jackson and John Brown are different wide receivers than Jordan Addison and Josh Downs. Let's look at the Devonta Smith case because Smith actually only weighed 170. And with Smith only weighing 170, this is going to cause a lot of people to go all in on Jordan Addison, thinking that he is the next Devonta Smith. A few different things here. Like I said, 40-yard dash primarily does not matter at the wide receiver position outside of the extremes like we're talking about here with weight. I mean, you really have to be on the furthest end of the extremes for me to even talk about a 40-yard dash or the size of a wide receiver. But Devonta Smith ran a 4.39 and Jordan Addison ran a 4.49. Josh Downs ran a 4.48. So if we're adjusting for their weights, I mean, Smith still much faster than these guys. Very similar to what we saw with both Deshaun Jackson and John Brown, as other lighter wide receivers were able to make an impact. But I don't think that matters nearly as much as going back and looking at who Devonta Smith was in college. Well, yeah, I mean, we just had pretty good seasons from Jordan Addison, where Jordan Addison accounted for 33% of his offense at Pitt as a sophomore, and he accounted for about 23% of USC's offense as a junior. Do you remember what Devonta Smith did in 2020? This is the reason I was ignoring the wait and why I was drafting Devonta Smith in the 2021 offseason. Smith came out and on an Alabama roster with John Mechie, with Jalen Waddle for half a season, had 1,800 receiving yards in 13 games played. Smith had 1,800 receiving yards in 13 games played. The man almost averaged 50% of the passing offense at Alabama on a per game basis, with John Mechie playing all 13 games and Jalen Waddle playing half the season and Najee Harris playing all 13 games. So for us to compare that level of dominance, where Smith was arguably one of the best collegiate wide receivers of all time, or at least he was for that individual season, and then try to say Jordan Addison is going to be just like that guy, I have news for you. Jordan Addison was never as good in college as Devonta Smith was. And if we are looking at Smith, he is the one real outlier that we can find in a sample of 216. So it goes back to talking about trying to chase that unicorn, trying to chase that mermaid. I don't think you can. I don't think you should try to go down that road. Now, does this mean I'm not drafting Jordan Addison at all? Does this mean I'm not drafting Josh Downs at all? It doesn't. I still think that these players can be effective. I still think these players have a shot at being good fantasy football assets, but I do have to move them down my wide receiver rankings. So if you're going to be looking at where I previously was ranking Jordan Addison, I had him in the same tier as Jackson Smith and Jigba. I had him ahead of Quentin Johnston, and I had to throw in the towel there. Jason is in his own tier. Jason, we always knew he's the wide receiver one, but it looks like he's not close to anybody. And at the same time, Quentin Johnston now has to go ahead of Jordan Addison. You can't take Addison. You can't even consider taking Addison ahead of Johnston in my mind. I think Addison's going to be a little bit closer to like the Zay Flowers tier. I still prefer Addison at the moment over Zay Flowers given the production profile. And if we're looking at Josh Downs, we knew he was going to be smaller, but I'm just a little more concerned about this data than I initially was. Downs, I'm going to be moving directly behind Jalen Hyatt. So he is going to be falling 1 to 2 spots for me. We had him neck and neck with Zay Flowers. At this point, I think you're going to have to prefer Zay. And between Jalen Hyatt, Josh Downs, Hyatt's a thinner wide receiver, definitely, but he's also someone that is prototyping to win with the deep ball. I think Downs and Hyatt will be in the same tier. It will primarily come down to the landing spot of both of these guys. If Josh Downs goes in round 2, I probably prefer Josh Downs. But I have a feeling that Josh Downs ends up going round 3 now, and I'm not going to be excited about that at all. So let me know what you're thinking. I really do value your opinion, and I'm hoping that I'm not overreacting, but the historical data is clear as day. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you play Dynasty. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment section or shoot me a message in our fantasy football group chat, which you can also find the link of in that comment section or in the description of this video. But thank you again. I appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day and really hope you get to see you with the video tomorrow.